Welcome back to Revelation on Demand podcast interested in what the Bible has to say about our lives today. Join us as we see what revelations we can find today. I'm your host, Justin D. Myers, and I'm joined today, as usual, by Mr. Chris Hess. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, brother, I'm doing good. Life's going good. A lot of work in my life right now, and God's just with me every step of the way.
Yeah. Talking about God being with us, a little bit of an update on what's been going on literally after we got done recording our podcast tonight, 2 weeks ago, and I got it all edited and ready for upload. I had to end up taking my wife to the hospital for blood clots in her leg from complications between just having a baby and COVID, and we spent the entire weekend, which I get a 3-day weekend every other week, which is why we have this recording schedule. We spent the entire weekend in the hospital, but she's home. She's doing much better. The only thing that we have to do is give her a blood thinner shot twice a day, which kind of sucks, but we're getting used to it. So.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. They don't want any more blood clots to form. So since she's had COVID and she just had gotten over from having a baby, that increases your clotting chance. So that's why she's on the thinner. And
right, and that also helps
going on right there.
Dissipate some of those clots as well.
Oh yeah, but they had to do a surgery and go in and actually remove the clots. There were so many. So.
Wow.
Yeah. No, it was interesting. So it was a rough weekend, especially after if you've been listening, I talked about my dad last time. He's making a miraculous recovery. Like they're talking about, or they're not talking about, they're going to switch him to outpatient rehab next week on Thursday. So he's going home. Like he's up and walking around and can take care of himself well enough that the rehab facility thinks he should be going home instead of staying there. So
good.
Anyone that was praying for that, thank you, because the prayers have been miraculous. And every day he reconnects more words. So what happens when you have a stroke is that there's damage that's caused to the brain, and your brain has to rewire to that section. So it takes a little while, especially when he had it on the left side, right where the speech center is in the brain.
Sure.
Which is why his physical recovery has been so miraculous, but his speech is slowly getting back. So
good.
I wanted to share a little bit of what I thought about after having, a confirmed case of COVID. I would highly suggest, if you are sure you haven't had COVID, go get the shot, because everyone I've seen who has the shot does much better. And not the single shot, which causes blood clots, but the one that you have to get in 2 doses. So.
Right, i.e., one of them that's highly recommended, and that's probably the most ethical is the Moderna, right?
Yeah, I think do your own research, double check this. I think the Moderna were the ones trying to use ethical stem cells. So if that is something that bothers you, then I think that one is safe. Don't quote me on it. Do your own research. I can't remember exactly, but I think you're right. I think that's the one. But as far as if you've had it and you've gotten through it, I don't know. I'm wrestling with the idea of actually getting the vaccine, I'm even wrestling with the idea of getting a flu vaccine this year, just because, I don't know. They don't seem to work. I always seem to get the flu a few months after getting the flu vaccine because they always have the wrong strain. So, I don't know. And I'm wrestling with that personally. So.
But you'll get microchipped and you'll shoot lasers out of your eyes.
Well, I don't think they're I think the vaccines, it's really hard to get a microchip in a vaccine.
Yeah.
When you think about the logistics of it. Because they'd have to hide it in the needle, and most vaccines are given with what's called the hypodermic needle, which means it doesn't matter where they stick you as long as they catch you in the fleshy part of your of your body anywhere, which I've become very accustomed to this hypodermic needle because that's what we have to give Candra shots with. Is it's way too small for modern microchips. Like even the smallest modern microchips couldn't fit in that. So if you ever seen
aliens,
well, I guess maybe, but if you ever seen like a tracking chip that they put in pets, it's a pretty big thing. Like
yeah, definitely.
It looks like a small pill but it would not fit in a hypodermic needle.
No,
so
no, of course not.
I don't think they could do something like that unless you're right. It's nanobots, which I guess maybe, but
that'd be so expensive.
I highly doubt it. Yeah. And then for the people who are worried about the mRNA vaccine, I actually looked into that, and my doctor told me exactly how it happens. So what they do is they take the spike protein from the coronavirus, and they cut that out. So what a spike protein does is it's a protein that on the virus that connects to your cells.
Correct.
Outer shell,
antigens and all
and
that
that's
stuff.
what lets that's what lets the virus get into the cell to inject its DNA and start taking over the cell to produce more viruses. So, excuse me. So it's not. They're just injecting you with the spike protein. There's no DNA going into your cells or anything like that. And they've been working on this type of vaccine for the flu for 10 years now. And the whole idea behind it is it doesn't get you as sick as a normal vaccine does. Your body always has a pretty strong reaction to vaccines. I mean, some people have stronger reactions than others because it is an actual pathogen, and whether it's dead or alive, which is what the majority of vaccines are,
which is
your body
gross.
Reacts to fight it.
Very.
Yeah. But your body reacts to fight it, and that's how you get sick. It's not you're sick; it's your body's defense system being kicked online. That's why you can feel sick for a day or two after getting a vaccine. So, this mRNA vaccine is supposed to be a lot less side effects like that. You're not supposed to get nearly as sick as you would with a normal vaccine. So,
right.
I'm struggling with that. I'm doing the research on that. That's something that's between me and God, and should be between our listeners and God on whether they should or not. But as far as if you haven't had this virus, it was 2 weeks of hell. Like, save yourself. So, because everyone I know that got vaccinated was sick for like only 3 days. It was like a bad cold.
Yeah,
mine was more than a bad cold.
You're right. At a science level, because you are getting that ribonucleic acid to interpret into your DNA prior to. Yeah, well, we can get into all that some other time. It's Bible reading time.
All right, so last time we talked about the writing on the wall, Daniel chapter 5.
Correct.
And we seen this prideful king and this arrogant king. He was having a party during a siege, and God confronts him because he finally sinned in a way that God couldn't handle anymore, and decided that he would send him a message. Daniel is brought out to interpret that message. This is the only king that we see Daniel, talk to in a way that's disrespectful, because he felt very disrespected by this king for using the sacred objects in such a disrespectful way. So,
Belshazzar. His name is Belshazzar.
Yeah, Belshazzar.
Yes.
So, yeah, see, I did it. But so after this whole incident with Daniel telling him you're going to lose your kingdom, like a few hours later, Darius the Mede, invaded the city. And as we talked, I think this is the invasion where they blocked up the rivers to get under the water gates. So,
what do we need to know going into today's episode?
Yes. So today we're going to be focusing on that king that just took over Babylon. So this chapter happens pretty quickly after Daniel chapter 5. So it's only been about a year or so. Darius may have been the only one in charge. There's some question as to whether he was only in charge of Babylon or if he was in charge of the entire empire of Babylon. Like, if he was just in charge of the city as a governor or if he was in charge of the whole empire. There's question of that historically. In the text, as we're going to read, it sounds like he is the ruler of the entire nation of Babylon.
That makes more sense because I knew it was a city and a nation and an empire. Yeah, this is so confusing to me for the longest time. Okay, I got it now.
Yeah. So it seems like he is a pretty powerful king, and as we'll see here in the first section, he's building his government pretty much to take care of this region, and that's what we will focus on, as well as the Den of Lions. Would you be so kind to read?
Oh yeah, so kind to read Daniel book 6 or chapter 6. There's not 6 books of Daniel. Forget I said that first thing. All right, why don't we start reading Daniel chapter 6 from verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against the man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God."
So what is a satrap? Which, by the way, that's satrap, not satrap. These satraps are the people who are in charge of collecting tribute and providing security for people. So I think a cultural reference for what these people are would be kind of like the sheriff of Nottingham. These kind of guys who come through and demand taxes, and they are supposed to take care of the security of the people in the area that they're appointed to. But as you know, some of them become corrupt and will not provide the best protection to people in the area. They're not necessarily people who are like making all the big decisions on what to do with each area. That would probably be, Daniel's job and the other 2 administrators. So these 120 satraps are put under Daniel and 2 other administrators, which are never named. But as we see, Daniel served Darius well and impressed him, and he's gained, as we know, a lot of skill in governance and leading people from his time with Nebuchadnezzar, because from the very first run-in he had with Nebuchadnezzar, he impressed him, and right away he was one of these administrators. And whether he had the skill at the time to do it or not, he learned very quickly. So at this point, Daniel's a much older man, and
it's been quite a while since he was first brought to Babylon. I was almost going to say from Bethlehem, from Jerusalem.
Yes,
excuse me, from Bethlehem. Anyway,
think of the song.
From Jerusalem. But yes, it's been 20 to 30 years after that, and we are several kings down the line. Justin had to explain this to me one day, and like how many kings had passed just from Nebuchadnezzar to Darius, or not? No, the guy
Uh-huh.
before Darius, Belshazzar, the guys we were just talking about, and it was like a numerous 4 or something like that. And over a very short period of time, and then it would stay with 1, and then it was 4.
Yeah, it was 4. It was 2 assassinations and 2. What do you call them? Sessions. Someone just died of other causes or was deposed or something like that.
Oh,
but 2 people were assassinated.
They just died. Yeah, and then the assassinations, of course. We can't have the ancient worlds without. We can't have the old world or the ancient history of this planet without a lot of assassinations going on.
Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if that was the way to ascend the government today, like in America? I know it is in some places around the world, like you can assassinate the dictator and become the dictator, but I mean, like, what if America, to become a congressman, you had to assassinate a congressman? Just thinking.
I mean, why does that suddenly make Congress
a lot of sense?
So much more interesting? I mean, not to a positive appeal, just...
Congress Battle Royale.
Yes. Oh, dude, I'm not saying we need that, but my day would be so much less boring when I tune on the news.
Anyways, so the satraps didn't really like Daniel. Again, we get back to this. He's a Jew, and we have this racism against Jews from the Babylonians, and so a lot of these satraps are not happy. It could have been a lot. It could have been a lot. Could have been a few. You know how the loud minority is. But anyways, they don't like him, so they start digging on him, and they can't find anything. The only thing they find is his devotion to his God. So every day, Daniel's praying over and over and over to his God, and he refuses to worship any other God but our God.
Which is this is good. That's why we love Daniel.
Yeah, no, he's a very pious and righteous man, especially for a period in the Old Testament where they don't have all the end time answers that we have, So they realize that if they're going to get him, this is the only way they can get him, because this is the only thing he is like so steadfast on. Otherwise, he follows the laws of the country, and he doesn't do anything corrupt. He's not taking any bribes from anyone. He's just doing his job as if he's serving God. So,
absolutely, because he's our guy. He's our Daniel guy.
Yeah. Shall we read the next little section?
Absolutely. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing.
Right. So here we see the satraps enacting their cunning plan to get Daniel killed, really, is what they're after. So in the Mede and Persian culture, when a king signs a law, it couldn't be revoked. So there's no I can just sign another law to, nullify that law. It was not allowed.
There's no such thing as an amendment.
Yes. So he can't amend a law once it's signed. And throughout this, we see, when the king reacts to what happens, we see that he has this kind of relationship with Daniel that you'd think he would have thought of that when these guys brought him this proposition. They'd be like, wait a minute, Daniel worships his God every day, and he never worships any other gods. Maybe this is going to affect him. This is one of his closest advisors. Like you think he'd know what was up, but I guess maybe this is one of those things where they were, having him sign something else, like to help bolster and unify Babylon, since the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, just took it over. So they're thinking, hey, if we do this worship thing for a month, it should help unify Babylon, and this is probably how they sold it to the king. And the king just, completely didn't think about Daniel in this, which is weird for how he reacts to what's about to happen.
Well, yeah. I mean, we all make mistakes, right? I mean, some of us are just like, oh, sure, have the entire nation I rule over pray for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not pray for me, but pray at me. I can answer your prayers now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was literally to be worshipped like a god, which, in this time, god kings were fairly common. It was common to say you're a god when you're a king, so that you have, a right to rule on the throne. So this was a very, very common practice. And the reason they do this for 30 days is they're trying not to raise suspicion from the king, which is probably part of the reason he didn't realize what was going on. So they said a month, because all they had to do is say, hey, here's one day, say this is the day that you worship me as the king. And they could have gone and caught Daniel praying to his God on that day, because Daniel would still go pray to God, So all they had to do was one day, but they did it for 30 days so that it would be less conspicuous that they're trying to target Daniel at this. So,
absolutely, yeah.
But my only other question is, how many other Jews how many righteous Jews in Babylon got caught up in this decree? That we only hear about Daniel because that is the focus of the story. But how many just, regular Jews who were devout and prayed to God every day got caught up in this? Because the Jews are still very much in Babylon.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, 100%. They all came over around the same time that, I was almost going to say that Daniel's Babylonian name, which is Belteshazzar. I made a super lame joke last time about it. Anyway, that Daniel, around the same time that Daniel was brought over to Babylon. Wait, where is Babylon geographically?
It is in Turkey. Would have been what's called Asia Minor. It's where modern day Turkey is. It's right along that coast, butting up to Israel, pretty much.
I knew it was close
Babylon
to Israel.
Was a very large, yeah.
I just wanted to know
Babylon was a
where
very
it would
large
be.
empire.
Yeah, well, go figure. I mean, if you think about it, the Romans went from Italy to the UK, and
yeah, all the way into the Asias.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this was a large empire, and if you're looking at a map, it's the area where modern day Turkey is. I don't think you can find a city still named Babylon, but I think it's very much in that Middle Eastern setting, over where the Fertile Crescent is, the place where people believe Eden may have been. So,
interesting. All right.
Yep.
Sounds good with me.
Yeah. Shall we read the next section, starting at verse 10?
Yes, we're starting at verse 10. Book 443. Chapter. Is that verse 10, guys? Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, Daniel, who was the exiles, who was, and they said to the king, oh yes. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or the decree you put in writing. Yes, he still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. So, quick breakdown of that. The wording kind of got complicated a little bit. Is that we're talking about basically the authorities have brought it to Daniel's attention, or Darius's attention, that they knew about Daniel, and now Darius had ran all over the place, like going, "Oh no, no, no!" So I don't know why I had to interrupt that, but I just thought I'd address that. Last little bit from this little section was, then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed," which we were just talking about.
Yeah. So here we see the king's reaction to this. And I do believe that, so this was one of those places where he didn't really think about the ramifications of what law he did. But we see that he really, really treasures Daniel, at least as one of these advisors, and he actually cares about the well-being of Daniel. And I know that some people, like, you can read this section like he's sarcastic about Daniel and what's coming up, but I really don't see that in this section. I feel like this is a man. I mean, he's a king. He's the king of a large nation. Like, why would he care so? Like, why would he go out of his way to try and stop this from happening? You know, find a loophole, find some way that he could stop Daniel from getting thrown into the lion's den. Could have been guilt, I guess. You know, he didn't want to kill a truly innocent man, but by their laws that he just passed, he's not an innocent man. You know, he's guilty of this. So I just don't see, you know, Darius thinking sarcastically towards Daniel. I see this as he really, really appreciates what Daniel does for him. So
that was my initial thinking as well.
Yeah. So we see that Daniel kneels 3 times a day, and this is one of those areas where Jews point to for the what do you call that? The ritual or the
practice.
Wow, practice. Yes, thank you. The practice of praying 3 times a day and kneeling towards Jerusalem. So this is one of those sections where the Jews point to, and also very, very similar to the Muslim practice of praying 5 times a day towards Mecca.
Right,
that's a little different.
It is a little different. That's part of their 5 pillars of Islam and stuff like that. But
yeah, that's something different. But this is one of those sections where the Jews point to praying 3 times a day. You know, morning, noon, and night, where they pray towards Jerusalem, and they have a very rote prayer, and I'm sure there's a place in there for them to make it more personal. I personally kind of like our Christian form of being, you know, a lot more loose with the rules of prayer, and just kind of the way I treat it is that every thought that I go through my mind, I try and say, I try to think, okay, God, what do you want to do with this thought? You know, kind of, I do try to take my thoughts captive, as some scripture has told us to do. So I feel like prayer for me is not so structured. It's more just kind of, as I think of something, I try and pray about it. if something comes across my mind, or someone for that matter, like especially when someone random comes across my mind, I really do try to pray for that person or whatever that thing is that I'm thinking about. So I definitely think that, structured prayer like this could be good and beneficial for people. I know a lot of people who say I have like a structured time first thing in the morning where I pray, and that's wonderful, and they get so much out of it, which is great. I'm so disorganized that I don't think something like that would help, but I do it a little differently. So anyways, we see the satraps use that same demeaning language that King... yeah, right? That same demeaning language that Belshazzar used when he addressed Daniel, calling him one of the exiles. This is a common way of them referring to the Jews in a slightly derogatory fashion, like reminding them, you're not part of this empire sort of thing. And of course, the Jews were probably more than happy to say, yeah, I'm not part of this empire. Like, I don't want to be part of you. I'm here because my God sent me here,
Right.
So the sundown thing, typically in the Medo-Persian culture, they would, if someone was charged with a crime, they would get a trial that night, which the king or satrap or administrator would sit over. Of course, since this is one of the administrators, this is the king's duty to sit over this trial. And of course, since the king can't find any loopholes, he has to send Daniel to the lion's den and seal it. And he can come out in the morning if he survives, and this is hinted at several times in the next section where Darius is talking about, may your God deliver you. So,
yes, sir.
You got anything to add on that?
Well, okay. So with a lot of that, I would just, plain and simple, to me, it's like, a person plays time and event. You got a lot of options for yourself, right? The modern world. I've been talking about ancient culture all day. I keep repeating ancient. But in this society, you just structurally speaking, it really affects you on a personal level with how everything is formatted, right? So if you really think about how it grinds down to exactly what this would implicate for these individuals, it's all boiled down to the system that basically controls them. What I love about Daniel so much is he always, thus far, and every time I've gone through this book in previous years or have been referenced to it, is that he's so outspoken and he stands out as a figure that pretty much lets you know that you're not bound by, not that you're not bound by the rules of this world, it's more of you're not bound by limitations that are going to prevent you from creating a connection with God or, God's power itself. Nothing in this world is going to limit God's power.
Yeah, and that brings up a nice point that this is one of the places in the Bible that we can point to that you can refuse or resist a unrighteous law that asks you to do something that would be against God. So in this case, we're not supposed to worship any other god but Yahweh. And Daniel realizes that. So when this law comes down, he's like, doesn't matter. I'm going to continue worshiping my God because that's what I am called to do. So we see this as one of those places. And, this is a heated debate among Christians today. What laws are we allowed to, essentially ignore and say, no, I've got to do this because of my belief or my conviction. So we see a lot of this today, but Daniel very clearly shows us that it's only if the law demands us to break a commandment that we worship God with in some way, like worshiping another god or denying God, for that matter, denying Jesus. These sort of laws are the laws that we are allowed to break without being in sin. So,
Right. Yes, absolutely.
nothing about a vaccine mandate or those sort of things. That's, again, between you and God sort of things.
Yes, actually. Yeah.
So,
Well, very well put.
be so kind to please read from verse 16.
Yes, sir. That's not part of it. Anyway, verse 16. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to the palace and spent the night without eating and without entertainment being brought to him. And he could not sleep. Ideally. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouth of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed, and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones.
Yeah. So, pretty brutal ending there.
I mean, I was so relieved. I was like, "Yay!" And then I forgot about that part.
Yeah,
I've heard of that verse before, specifically, and I'm like, "Oh."
Uh-huh. Yeah, and we may look at that with today's morals and be like, what? Their family got thrown into for their mistake? Like, yeah, this was very common practice back in ancient times. It was especially to prevent, like brothers or sons or daughters, brothers or sons, because daughters didn't do this sort of thing in these days. Brothers or sons of the people who were being punished from coming back and, having vengeance or, plotting to take over the kingship or whatever. So often the corporate punishment would go on to the family too. You're like, wait, what about the women? Yeah, it counted them all because it counted the household. So very much so, the man of the household back in these days had a very, very large responsibility. If he did something wrong, he could very well end up getting his whole family nixed off the face of the earth. So, it sounds brutal to us today, but it was commonplace back then.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. So, Darius didn't sleep that night, or at least couldn't get much sleep. He, didn't eat, didn't drink. He was basically fasting and kind of praying. Of course, he's not praying to God. He's just like, gosh, I hope Daniel's all right. Like this really grieved him, which is why I have a hard time saying that he was being sarcastic towards Daniel when he puts him in the pit.
That last statement, that like everything that they've said about Darius so far was like, he's such a joker.
Yeah, no, I think he really does care about Daniel. And of course, Daniel is like, this is your law. This is the punishment. I will accept the punishment. I'm innocent and my God will deliver me. Like Daniel's just cool about this. He's like, yep, I'm not worried about it. And, so we see the sealing with the ring and all that. Again, a very common practice. If you needed to seal, some sort of barrier, the king would put this wax seal on it in a way that if you moved it or something like that, the wax seal would probably break. So, we see that Daniel spent the entire night in there. And, I was just thinking about it as you're reading again. Do you think he was like in there and the cats were like loving on them and just, getting pets and stuff like that? Or do you think that they were, still hungry and wanted to get him, but the angel of the Lord just stood between Daniel and the cats, and the cats refused to get anywhere near Daniel because of the, angel of the Lord that was there,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Because we see mostly, Daniel's in there just chilling with the cats. Like, we don't see the often depicted the cats are pacing back and forth and they want to eat Daniel, but they're not allowed to by this angel or this daemon, as we've called them before, which also brings into question, is this, God himself there, or is this pretty typical imagery for the Old Testament where we see a angel or daemon, doing God's bidding by being sent to him? I mean, we see him with Abraham. We've seen him with many other, Old Testament people who have interacted with God and have had some angel or some being come and visit them and either protect them or deliver a message. And we even seen that in
the book of Daniel. Yeah, just not that long ago, in a few chapters, with the pit of fire. Yeah.
Yeah. So Daniel isn't upset with Darius over all this, falsely accused and falsely, at least falsely attempted to be executed. But Daniel doesn't seem very upset with Darius over this, and I don't think he really wanted the guys who accused him of this to get destroyed in the way they do, but I think this is just Darius venting his rage because he was tricked. He signed this order into law deceitfully. These guys were trying to get Daniel and they failed. So I think this is just him, turning that anger back on the guys who lied to him, essentially. And just as if to put a fine point on it, these guys are dead before they even hit the den of the den floor. So these lions are catching them as they're thrown in and killing them and their families. Yeah. So as if to put a fine point on as how dangerous it was where Daniel was. These lions are famished and probably a little upset that they were kept from eating Daniel, because the way they kept lions in these dens is they would malnourish them. They wouldn't feed them very much. They keep them alive, but they keep them very hungry so that they could execute people in this manner.
And so you couldn't cuddle up with them and play with kitty cats.
So that's. So I think that might be a misrepresentation of how Daniel spent the night in the lion's den. I don't think it was so calm. I think the lions were hungry, and the daemon just stayed there between him and the lions. And the lions, of course, being God's creatures, when they see a messenger from God, and I said this before on this message or on this podcast, animals do as God say without thinking. They just do as they're commanded. So, I mean, this daemon is from God. It was sent to protect him, and he did. And of course, we see that the evildoers, at least, are getting their justice, or maybe it's a little brutal that their whole family gets it, but we see that justice is done.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Overall, good day, bad day. Bad day for someone else, but good day for the believers.
Yes.
And Darius, if you think about it, in all seriousness, we had to look at Nebuchadnezzar, how much it took for him to start believing. How negligent Belshazzar was, to the point where there was no saving grace even for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he was just that arrogant. God really tries to put these kings in a situation with Daniel where they're almost codependent on him, of I need to know more about this. A very good way of associating God into their lives, because they're such metaphysical people, I would say, in their beliefs. But
yeah, Yeah, and just to see the difference in the way these three kings, like you said, Nebuchadnezzar took 4 entire chapters to realize who the God of Yahweh is, and Darius did it in 1. So as we're about to see in this final section, when he makes a decree about our God, and yeah, it's just the night and day difference between Darius and Nebuchadnezzar. So we can see these kind of reactions even today, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we finish out.
Yeah, right. All right, well, might as well finish out here. Stay strong. This is the last section of the day. Starting from verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and revere the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian.
Yeah. So we close out the history section of Daniel with this this edict to fear Daniel's God, which, as we say, is Yahweh. This edict to fear Yahweh. And as we see, this is that reaction where some unbelievers, when they're first met with Yahweh, whether it's they have some epiphany like Paul, or they are given the gospel in a manner by some other disciple, then we see these 3 main reactions. We see the person like Nebuchadnezzar who's going to wrestle with this for years. He's the guy who's going to go back and forth and be like, is he real? Is he there? Should I worship him? Should I not? Maybe there's fits and starts where he's like, yes, he's God, and he worships him, and then he just kind of forgets the power of God. And it takes some major humbling thing to get these people to finally see God for who he is. Then we have people like Belshazzar who, they see the power of God. They literally see God act in some way, and it's like they just can't believe it. It's like, I don't believe in miracles. I don't believe that's possible. It's these people who just, no. I see the evidence and I'm right, and I know what's right. So, and then we see the people like Darius who, when they see the power of God, they're just like, yep, that's a God. That is the one true God. And then revere and fear him. I'd like to think that at this point, Darius, would have become not a Jew in the way of being, part of the Jews, but I'd like to think that he at least would have been worshiping Yahweh instead of other gods at this point. And maybe, not thinking himself so much of a god as other kings before him. So it's just interesting to see this narrative, this first section, which at one point was thought to be a separate book from the next 6 chapters. It's interesting to see how differently people can react to knowing who God is, and just to be ready for that. If you are sharing the gospel, be ready for these 3 distinct reactions. And of course, there's more nuance to it. The people aren't going to react like these kings did because they're not kings, but we definitely see that. And as we continue on in our study of Daniel, we'll really be getting into more of the spiritual stuff, because the last 6 chapters in Daniel are all about visions and future prophecies. So we're going to be connecting a lot of that back to Revelation, our first study. And we'll see what's been fulfilled already and what's yet to come, and the discussions on whether those are right, because there's a lot of discrepancy on different denominations and different theological studies that whether these have truly been fulfilled or partially fulfilled, or if they have yet to be fulfilled. So I'm really excited for the next 6 chapters. It's more in line with our wheelhouse, but we definitely had to go through this because we needed to see that Daniel has a track record of being a prophet and that his prophecies are true. And so all the prophecies we've seen so far have been, other than the last part of the statue prophecy, which would happen in history, we see that Daniel is 100% correct prophet. He's been right all the time, and as God tells us in other scripture, if a prophet's wrong once, they're not a prophet. So,
well, the prophecy of the Bible, I would say, would have probably prevented that last phase. We won't get into that now, but yes.
Oh, we will get into it in the sections to come.
Really?
Because there's a lot of Daniel that John pulls on when he wrote Revelation. So we will see a lot of similarity between a lot of these prophecies to come and Revelation, which I am very excited for because that is our wheelhouse. That is our name. That is our title.
Whoa, go figure.
You got anything else to add?
God bless all of y'all. As usual, we appreciate anyone that is listening, having a good time. We're praying for all of you, and comments, questions, or concerns. Like I said, I say pretty much every episode, and Justin makes sure to cover at the end of the episode. You come and you reach out to someone. You can contact us on our Gmail, whatever the case may be. If you're in a tough spot right now, yeah. I'm not on the Facebook. I'm not on the social medias, but
yeah, that's right. I am though. They can get me. Yeah. All right. Thank you for listening to the Revelation on Demand podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you catch podcasts from. Please, if you like what we're doing, share this with a friend, family member, or someone from your church. It really helps. This is a completely private venture, and we receive no funding from any sources. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please feel free to contact us at revelationondemand@gmail.com. God bless, and see you next time.